Thank you, David. So the talk is going to be, and thank you very much for the invitation. It's a pleasure to give this talk. So today's talk is going to be about transport electrification and interaction of that with the electricity grid. Before that, RMIT University acknowledges the people of Wurrung and Wurrung language groups of the Eastern Kulin Nation on whose unceded lands we conduct the business of the university. RMIT also respectfully acknowledges their ancestors, elders, past and present, and also acknowledges the traditional custodians and their ancestors of the lands and waters across Australia, where we conduct our business. So this talk is mainly about climate change. We have felt our climate change. We are now seeing extreme weathers in Europe. We had extreme weathers in Australia, and we are continue to have even more extreme weathers. We have bushfires, we have traffic jams, we have pollutions from our coal power plants. Indeed, the climate change is the greatest challenge of mankind, and we need to action today. Tomorrow is late. Energy and transport sectors are the largest contributors to greenhouse gas emissions. They contribute almost 70 to 80% of all the emissions. And unfortunately, Australia is one of the largest contributors in terms of per capita. You see that we are ranked second after Saudi Arabia in terms of the emissions per person that we are producing. And this is not good. So we need to do something. And it is important for Australians. It was the case for the previous federal election. And Australians showed that they are very sensitive. They do care about the environment. We need to do something. We need some actions. And even if we look at the per country, still, although we are in terms of population, we are not large country, but in terms of emissions, we are generating comparable to UK, for example. Our population is much smaller than UK, but our emission is very comparable to UK. We are generating lots of emissions. We need to do something urgently. So this data is for US. So Australian data is very similar. So as we see, the transport sector is responsible almost for 1/4 of emissions in US. Combined with electricity and industry, is almost 75 to 80% of the emissions. That is similar in Australia. So transport is about 20%, the contribution of transport sector is about 20% of the whole emissions. And the only solution is zero emission transport. If you want to decarbonize the transport, if you want to decarbonize the economy, we need to have zero emission transport solutions. And currently there are only two solutions for that, either electric vehicles or hydrogen powered vehicles. If we use clean energy to power electric vehicles or to generate hydrogen from water. These are the only solutions. Hydrogen is not yet economic, but electric vehicles are economic. They have been shown to be very economic and viable solution to decarbonize the transport sector. We need some more in Australia. So this brings me to the agenda of this talk. I'm going to present something about why we need EVs, the charging requirement of EVs and the charging infrastructure, especially EVs and the grid. This is, I believe, very important, especially for Australia, for normal citizens. Some challenges and opportunities, and what we do at RMIT within our electric vehicle living lab, the newly established living lab that we established at RMIT. So as I said, EVs are the only viable solutions combined with hydrogen powered vehicles. It's the only viable solutions to decarbonize the transport sector. Its emission is much, much lower than conventional car. I'm not saying that the emission is zero, since EVs, in order to manufacture EVs, the emission of manufacturing is a bit larger than conventional cars, but that is mainly because the industries are not using clean energy. If we have full clean energy within our industries, within our mining sector, it's going to be, again, very comparable to what we have for conventional cars. But the running cost and the running emission from running of EVs is much, much slower, even if we power them with the grid, which is not 100% renewable. The running cost is more than 70% less than conventional vehicles. And the prices these days are very competitive. Especially in Europe, we have very competitive pricing for EVs. Unfortunately, it's not the case in Australia, but I believe our policymakers, our governments, both state and federal governments, they need to do something. They need to lower the prices for consumers, since we need to have more and more EVs within our role in our roads. So this is a very simple comparison between EVs and other cars. So in conventional cars, they are usually powered by gas, either petroleum or natural gas. They don't have any battery, and the fuel is just gas. And this is the conventional cars that all of us know how they function. The other generation are conventional hybrid cars. It has a small battery, and the battery is charged from the diesel that car is using, from the gas that car is using. It's a bit more efficient than conventional cars. The efficiency is improved, and the fuel consumption is lower. The next generation are plug-in hybrids. So again, we have a bit larger batteries, and that battery can be charged by plugging into the grid. So they can be charged by grid electricity. Again, it uses gas, so it's not really zero emission. And finally, we have EVs like Tesla cars, like Nissan Leaf. We have many brands in Australian market these days. So they have only electric motor. They don't have any diesel, and they are powered by plugging the electric motor, plugging the battery, and just charging the battery either from grid or from other batteries. That's the only way of charging the car. The battery is pretty important part of this vehicle. Their battery is much larger than plug-in hybrid and hybrid cars. And they have a very high torque, very efficient car. And if we combine this by charging from renewable energy, we can achieve our zero emission goals in transport sector. So again, this data is from US. So it compares the emissions, the running emission, not manufacturing of the cars. As I said, in order to manufacture EVs, the emission is a bit larger than conventional, but the main emission is for the running emission of the car when we use the car. So if you compare EVs connected to the grid, the current grid that we have, it's about 20-25% renewable, but others coming from coal power plant, I should say. And if you compare these two cases, you see that the emission is almost 30% of the emission of conventional vehicles. Still much, much lower. But if we have clean energy, assuming that clean energy doesn't have any emission coming from hydro, coming from solar PVs, coming from wind turbines, the emission is going to be very, very low. So it is not really comparable with the conventional vehicles. And we can really decarbonize the economy by having more and more EVs running in our road. But although we have experienced increased sales in Australia, for example, the sales in 2021, we had about 20,000 EV sales, which is huge increase compared to 2020. But still we are lagging behind many developed nations. Last year, almost 2% of the new car sales were EV, but in Norway it is 73%. Almost all new cars are EV. In Sweden it is 56%. In Germany is 24%. In China is 23%. In US is 5%. So if you look at especially the European countries, they provide very good incentives. Buying an EV in terms of price is very comparable to buying a conventional car. But in terms of the environmental impact, the impact is really much more. You may argue that we don't have good infrastructure here. If you have EVs, then you might experience problems and you want to drive from Melbourne to Sydney, for example. But what we need to have more EVs. Infrastructure needs to come from investment. Somebody needs to do that investment. If government invests, we have to pay through taxes. But if you don't have enough EVs, there is no good business case for the private sector to come and invest in creating the infrastructure. We need to have good policies in order to promote having EVs, and then infrastructure will be created. We will have more and more fast charging, better grid to support uptake of EVs, and then we will be more comparable to leading European countries. But there are some challenges. We have about 20 million motor vehicles in Australia. If we have only 25% of them electrified with a battery size of 80 kilowatt hour, this is roughly the average battery size of many vehicles, many recent vehicles. So I'm pretty sure that in 4 or 5 years, it would be 150 to 100K, which means that we can go non-stop from Melbourne to Sydney. It will require charging, the charging requirement is going to be 400 gigawatt hour. That is huge. Our daily consumption in Australia is about 250 gigawatt hour. So if we need to charge our vehicles once a week, so just compare it with that. 1 week charging is going to be comparable to 2-day consumption of the whole country within the residential sector, industrial sector, and that is huge. Our grid is not ready for that. You saw that we are in energy crisis. We had for the first time, Australian energy market operator intervened in the market and they suspended the market. So we need to do things urgently in upgrading the grid, promoting uptake of EVs. All of them needs to be done all together. And some vehicles like taxis, public transport, buses, they even require double charging, more than once daily charging. So if we want to have more EVs on our road, we need to do more to the grid. So this is the latest data that I could collect from the charging stations. These are the public charging stations that we have. Many EVs are charged at homes. So we have chargers, wall charge, like Tesla wall charge, and people use it for charging their vehicles. But we also have public charging stations, mainly supported by federal and state government. For example, the federal government has a program called Future Fuel Program through ARENA, Australian Renewable Agency, and they are supporting companies like JetCharge and other infrastructure providers in order to establish a network of charging. So we have two types of chargers, DC chargers and standard AC chargers. AC chargers are slow chargers. So it is something like 22K or 7K, most cases at home, or 10K, which means that if you have a battery of 80K, you will need to have 4 hours. You need to connect your car 4 hours. But
I think there's a mistake in the slide there. I see that the national numbers and the Western Australian numbers are the same.
Oh yeah, sorry for that. Western Australian number should be much less than Victoria.
Yeah, I was thinking, wow, they're doing well.
Yeah, sorry for that. No. The national number is correct, but Western Australia number is not correct. I'll modify it and then communicate it to you, the correct numbers. Thanks for noting that. For DC chargers, these days we have even 500K chargers, which means that you can charge your car in 10 minutes. But that is really expensive to create. You need to upgrade the network, you need to upgrade the electrical systems, and it's super expensive. But we have the technology in order to have super fast chargers, which mean and you can charge your car in less than 10 minutes. So as I said, EVs will have significant consequences to the energy market. We are in the middle of energy crisis, and having another thing to pressurize the network would be difficult to cope from the network side. We need to have investment. Somebody needs to invest. Either government needs to invest and then we will pay as tax, or we need to have investment from the private sector, but we need to do it to save our environment. So sometimes our politicians say that in order to save our environments, in order to have renewables, EVs, things are going to be cheaper for customers. But unfortunately, that's not the case. In order to have these kind of things, we need to invest, and that investment needs to be paid either indirectly by us through tax or directly by us. But that is unfortunately the only way to save the environment. We have to spend, we have to do this urgently, otherwise tomorrow is late. So these sort of things has happened to the network. And I'm an electrical engineer. I know that what has happened to the grid when we had uptake of solar PV. So 10 years ago, 15 years ago, it was fantastic. We said that our households can generate power and then they can export to the grid, but technically it is very challenging to the grid. So what happens is that when you have 30%, 40%, 50% of customers in the same suburb generating in peak hours, let's say in December, in January, 1 p.m. sunny day, they will generate enormous power, and all of them will start exporting to the grid. So it will impact the grid. It will lead to voltage rise. So your neighbor who doesn't have any PV, they will pay the price for you. So we have to accommodate that. In order to accommodate that, we need to augment the network. We need to invest and upgrade the network. This needs to be done by distribution network operators, and somebody will have to pay for that. And in many cases, they just pass the cost to customers. So you may have seen in your energy bills, in your electricity bills, you have two elements. One is the energy price, 25 cents, 30 cents. The other one is network charge, almost around $1. That $1 is very much dependent on these kind of investments that DNSPs are doing. We've even seen some export limits introduced first in South Australia, but I guess it will be introduced to other jurisdictions very soon in the next 2-3 years. So we need to do something in order to accommodate these PVs. And also, if we want to have EVs, we need to do something to accommodate efficiently that EVs. Otherwise, the customers without EV will pay the price for that. So let's again consider another example, the public transport electrification. For the Victoria case, which I do have the numbers for that, we have about 4,000 public transport buses in Victoria. And if you want to electrify all the buses, usually the buses will consume about 500 kilowatt hour daily. This is about 2 gigawatt hour daily consumption. Victoria's peak consumption is just 9 gigawatt hour in summer, 7.5 in winter. Just compare that number with this. This is huge. So only by electrifying only the public transport, I'm not talking about the private sector, only public transport. In the private sector, you can incentivize, but the public transport, its aim is mainly to move people from one location to the other location. The cost of charging is not much important. So they have to have their buses running. Otherwise, they can't really serve that mobility demand. We need to really plan for this. We need to manage that. And we know that electrification of the transport or using hydrogen fuel, again, in order to generate hydrogen, we need to consume energy. That is the only way of decarbonizing the transport sector, but it needs to be well managed. Otherwise, some vulnerable customers will have to pay the price for that. It will push the wholesale prices up, disadvantages people. This is not something that we want in our energy sector. We know that we want some transformation. We are just in the middle of transition to high levels of renewables, hopefully high levels of EVs within the network, but this needs to be done carefully. For the private vehicles, the things are even worse. So most private vehicles are charged at home, and most of them are uncoordinated. You go to your workplace, and then when you're back home, that is exactly the peak hour, 4 p.m., 5 p.m. until 9 p.m., 10 p.m. And then that is the best time for you in terms of comfort to plug in your vehicle and start charging the vehicle. This will push up the demand. That will push up the prices. That may lead to some issues for the grid. And finally, it may even impact consumer satisfaction. So we need to coordinate this. We need to manage these charging. This is coming. EVs are coming. So we need to plan for that. Different stakeholders, government, DNSPs, even customers need to be ready and to participate in the management and coordination of these charging. There's been lots of trials. EVs are new things. So we don't know yet many things about EVs and how customers are responding to this new technology. And there've been some trials, both internationally and even recently, since 2-3 years ago in Australia, studying how customers are responding, how we can do coordination, how we can do smart management of the charging, how we can have smart chargers. One of them is in UK, and I have just summarized the data here. So in the UK study, they did it about 3-4 years ago. They had about 200 EVs, and then they just distributed that EVs in some clusters. And so all clusters are together. So let's say they are in a single street and they are all neighbors. You have 10, 20 neighbors, all with EVs. They just wanted to see if they all start charging their vehicles in a very uncoordinated fashion, what will happen to the network. And what they found was, even with very small charges, 3.3K charges, these days we at homes, most of us have 10K charges, which means that when you're charging your vehicle, the load is 3 times of this. The current that you're soaking from the grid is 3 times of this. With this very small charger, if you have 50% of EV penetration in the grid, you will have congestion. So they concluded that almost 1/3 of all low voltage feeders, the distribution grids, the wires that we have in our suburbs, it has to be reinforced. So we need to upgrade the network, and that is costly. That is huge. It involves huge costs. So the assets, the distribution asset in Australia is about $7 billion. The value of that $70 billion, $80 billion. And again, in order to reinforce that, we need to spend billions of dollars. So the only good solution for that is managed charging. We need to coordinate charging through smart pricing. So potentially by having good tariffs. So I guess within the next 2-3 years, when we have more EVs, we are going to have a different tariff structure for EVs. So the networks will be smart. Whenever you plug in your EV, they will recognize that this is EV, this is different, and then you're going to be on a different tariff. These are the kind of trials that is happening right now. So that we have a couple of trials like that in Australia. Another trial which has just finished, this Origin trial, and they wanted to have something about making the charging a bit smart. So they had smart chargers, and they asked their customers to agree on these smart charging. So they had peak and off-peak periods. So the peak period is from this time, the morning peak and afternoon peak. So they asked the customers, if you decide not to charge during peak times and charge during off-peak period, then we'll give you incentive, 10 cents per kilowatt hour. And what they observed was that it reduced the charging in peak time. So you see that from 30% charging in peak time, it reduced to only 10%. They did a second experiment. In that experiment, they asked the customers to give full control of their charging to Origin. So Origin, as a retailer, has the ability to coordinate your charging 100%. And then for that, they gave some more to customers. So if you participate in the program, you'll be given 25 cents per day, and also that 10 cents per kilowatt hour charging during off-peak period. And again, that really helped to lower the peak charging. You see that from 10%, they had only 6% charging during that peak hour. So we do see some sort of customer engagement. So customer engagement is a key in these kind of behavioral changes. When you have a new technology, you need to really engage customers in order to have a good and efficient management of the things. That is very important in energy management things, including coordinated charging. There was another, or there is, this is still ongoing, there is another trial by Germana. This is a distributor is a DNSP, energy distributor in Victoria and Victoria, Northern Territory, and ACT. So they had, they even have a website for that, evgrid.com.au. If you go to that website, you can find all the information there. So they just wanted to see whether they can have a network operated or network control charging. They give some incentive to customers, and then customers give full control over their charging coordination to the network. And then the network can really plan the charging. They can start the charging whenever they want. But it needs to be done in a way that the network can accommodate it. They plan the charging for off-peak periods. If something happens urgently, then and they can do something, they can really shut down your charging, these sort of things, in order to just save the network. Again, they could recruit good customers, and Tasmanians recorded the highest interest and the highest participation rate. They have recruited about 500 participants, and the success rate for usually the way that they do this, they just reach out to customers and then say, we have this plan, we give you this and that if you agree to be part of this study. And the acceptance rate from Tasmanians was the highest. So so far they have about 500 participants, and they are doing the trial. The trial is not yet finalized. We had access actually, and do have access to some of the data. We've used the data to identify customers with EV at home. So you know that in Australia and in Victoria and many other jurisdictions, we have mandatory smart chargers. So every 30 seconds, the retailer and the DNSP reads our consumption. So we have developed some machine learning algorithms that enables them to identify households with EVs. But they are doing this study. And I think within the next year or two, we will learn the findings from this study. These are the Australian studies, almost all of them are funded by the federal government through ANZAAS program, Australian Renewable Agency program. So in some, EVs are really, will have significant impacts on the grid. So the charging time, either daytime charging, peak time, early evening charging, nighttime charging, even if our nighttime is now really off peak, 2 a.m., 3 a.m., we are not consuming much energy. And if all EVs are planned for that period, we are going to see another peak in that period. And we know that nighttime charging, nighttime energy is not a good energy. It's coming from, we don't have any solar. We have limited capacity to store our solar generation. And nighttime is usually coming from the coal power plant, which is not clean energy. So we need to do it smartly. Fast charging, slow charging. Fast charging is good for customers, but sometimes slow charging might be something for the benefit of the grid. So we need to coordinate the chargings. We need to have the charging from clean energy. So one of the major problems that the network has is minimum demand or negative demand in some times of the day. For example, last year in October, there was some days that South Australia experienced negative demand. The particular day, I think it was 10th of October, they had minus 64 megawatt hour in one day in October, which means they could generate more than what they were consuming. So EVs are large batteries. They can help the network. So when you're generating, you have to do something with that generation. Otherwise, it will be wasted. So you can program the charging of EVs to be in that time. That is something that Australian Energy Market Operator is now working. This is one of their challenges, to accommodate that minimum demand problem. And EVs have large batteries. Collectively, they will act as a super large battery, and then we can use that battery to support the grid. So EVs have some challenges, and charging infrastructure is one of the challenges, which really fuels that range anxiety among EV owners, which in many cases they think that they have to wait for long hours to charge their vehicles at stations, which is to some extent that's true. So it has impacts on the grid. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data in order to inform the policy making in the sector. And having more data from consumers, having more data from the load profiles, the charging profiles, is something that needs to happen. And this is one of the things that AEMO, Australian Energy Market Operator, has also identified as one of the things that we need to do in EV space. But we know that EVs are really much more cost effective when we have renewables. So for example, if we have solar at our home, we can really integrate that within our EV charging and plan the charging whenever we have excess generation. Instead of exporting it to the grid, we can charge our battery. And one of the other issues is that we don't have good policies. For example, one of the things that we noticed with a couple of industry partners, you may have seen that many shopping centers have EV charging stations. So you can charge your car, you can plug in and charge your car. and they sell the electricity to you, but the only entity that has license to sell electricity is retailer. So you can't really put a charger at your workplace, at your parking, and then start selling electricity. There's a lack of policy there. In the next 3, 4, 5 years, the AEMC, the Australian Energy Regulator, they need to put some policies in order to manage that sector as well. And the other opportunities that EVs can bring is the storage. So EVs are big batteries. There is an estimate that only in the residential sector, we need about 10 gigawatt hour of battery storage to accommodate our excess generation from rooftop solar. That requires huge investments, but EVs can provide that through two-way charges. So we have a technology that allows to discharge the charger of the battery of the vehicle. These days, only some limited models support that. For example, Tesla models, they don't support discharging of the battery, but I think within the next 2-3 years, more and more models will support. So we have technologies on a vehicle to grid. We can support the grid. We can discharge the battery whenever needed. We can use the vehicle battery as a household battery, standalone battery, vehicle to home, or vehicle to load when we want. Of course, we know that whenever we discharge our battery, the battery degrades. So if we have frequent charging and discharging, the batteries will lose their value, and the battery is the most valuable part of EV. So we did a study on, this is not on EVs, this is on EVs. Unfortunately, we don't have enough data, but on customers with batteries, those who have participated in Victoria's battery program. So Victorian government has an incentive for battery. They provide you up to 4,500 if you install a battery in your house. Half of the battery's cost. So we did a study. This is about 5,000 customers with and without battery that we use in our study. What we found was that without government incentive on any energy schemes, either fixed rate or time of use, the payback period of investment in batteries is more than 25 years. It's too long. Government incentive can bring it even up to 11 years, 10 years. It's long, but somehow you can't really justify investment in batteries. That is pretty much similar for EVs as well. So if we have good incentive, for example, if Victorian government provides incentive for household battery, but doesn't provide incentive for V2X enabled cars, that's the same battery, but the capacity of battery is 8 times more than the average 10K battery a household. So we can provide that kind of incentives, and the households can use that battery in order to power their houses whenever they don't have generation from their PVs, and the payback period is going to be even better than this. This is with the prices of electricity that we had a year and a half ago. Now we have much stronger prices. The prices are up, so the payback period, the value of battery, the cost of a battery is lower, the prices are higher, so the payback period is going to be less. So my guess is that instead of 11, we are going to see 9, 8 in that rate, definitely less than 10. So we can use, if we aggregate all EV batteries, we will have a giant battery, and then we can use that battery to support the markets. If something happens in the market, we call it frequency market, FCAS market, which is controlled by AEMO, Australian Energy Market Operator. Sometimes some events happen, and then you need agents generation, and batteries can provide very fast response for that, especially the public transport fleet or heavy vehicle fleet in councils, heavy vehicle fleet in many industries. If they are electrified, they will have large batteries and they can really support the grid. But we don't have many trials for that. So I think within the next year, we are going to see more and more of trials of this type. This is the trial that has started from last year. Again, ARENA supported trial. They wanted to see if we put EVs in the frequency market, what sort of gain we are going to have. Is it really economically viable? Currently with these settings, it's not viable, but my prediction is that in the next 4 or 5 years, the cost of EVs, the cost of batteries is going to be less, and then there's going to be good economy in V2X services, vehicle to grid, vehicle to home, and these sort of services. So in order to tackle all these challenges, Victorian government gave us some funding. So we've been awarded about $5 million from Victorian government, and that has been used in order to create an infrastructure. This is really state-of-the-art infrastructure, which enables us to really simulate a very realistic EV interaction with the grid. So we have EV emulators, battery emulators, PV emulators in one side, and the grid emulator in the other side. These are the infrastructures, not EV side, but the grid side of the things. These are the infrastructures that AMO is also using. But we have added EVs, batteries, and PV simulators. And this is very realistic. So it enables us to apply our coordination algorithms, smart charging algorithms, and see what happens in realistic systems. And then we can really, whenever we see a success here, we can hope that that will also be successful in realistic applications in real systems. So our core here is to do these simulations and also use AI technologies in order to efficiently integrate EVs. So in order to do that, we have established EV Data Hub in collaboration with Center for New Energy Technologies. The Data Hub has, it's been launched as of last week. So it has network data, EV operational data, EV charging profiles, the load profiles coming from smart meters, and also some trial data, consumer behaviors. But we are completing the data hub. We are adding more and more data, and hopefully that will facilitate really AI-informed decision-making in the sector. It will help both researchers and also planners, the network planners, to have really informed decisions to better plan the network. As I said, AI, which is our main focus, it brings lots of good things to EV management. So AI these days is being used in order to have better batteries. So AI is being used in order to have better materials to manufacture EV batteries. And to have better control systems for EVs. It uses to have better interaction of EVs with the grid in order to schedule the battery charging, in order to schedule even battery discharging through participation in frequency markets if it is V2G enabled. AI is being now used by EV charging station owners, again, to have to provide that smart charging to customers. And AI can be used by EV customers themselves in order to optimize everything for them. So there are lots of benefits of AI for EVs. As I said, it can be used in order to optimize the battery material. It can be used to optimize the manufacturing. It will lower the manufacturing cost of EVs. it will improve the battery technologies so that the degradation is not going to be a quick process in batteries. And the whole process can be improved by AI technologies. It will help infrastructure owners, aggregators, network planners. It will help AMO, energy market operator, in order to have better forecast of what will be needed in terms of charging requirement. If we have electrification of public transport, electrification of private sector, and they can do a traffic flow control, for example, AI-assisted traffic flow. There are a range of things that planners, policymakers, and operators will be able to do by the AI technologies. For charging stations, it helps to have better smart charging, lower energy cost, better modeling of, for example, one of the challenges that it's been largely done is the best location for chargers. So we need to really locate our charging stations in the best location. We don't have a huge budget in order to create charging station, and creating a charging station really needs huge budget, especially in terms of the electrical works and the network side of the things. It is really huge, the regulatory part of that. So it needs to be optimized. And also the charging scheduling for EVs. So for example, some of EVs might be parked for 10 hours to 15 hours in public parkings, in airport parks, for example, in shopping centers. And then if there is a good business case, the battery of that vehicles, if they are connected to the grid, can be used for V2G operations and can support the grid. And finally, for EV drivers, AI can really address the range anxiety problem by really developing optimal planning, developing smart charging, and being energy aware in routing. And these are some of the things that our team and our team members have previously developed. Also have the team members here. These are the postdocs that are working within our EV center, and they have their expertise from algorithms, from e-mobility analytics, deep learning technologies, AI, power systems, and different kind of techniques. And we are still hiring, so we will have soon another 4 postdocs joining the team and then developing smart algorithms for EV. I should also acknowledge the fundings that we've had in the past 3-4 years by Victorian Government, Australian Research Council, City of Melbourne, City Power Co, which is one of the distributors here in Victoria, C4Net, Centre for New Energy Technologies, and Victorian Department of Transport. They are the main funding bodies supporting our research. That brings me to the last slide. So electrification of transport is the only viable solution to decarbonize the transport sector, together with hydrogen-powered fleet. But hydrogen is not there yet. It's not yet economic. My prediction is that in the next 4 or 5 years, it will be. So EVs combined with hydrogen-powered vehicles are the only solutions to decarbonize the transport sector and to a large extent decarbonize the economy. But it has many challenges and opportunities. So EVs have huge impact on the grid, although they can support the grid, but they need to be well managed and coordinated. And also customers need to have more and more engagement with the different plans. They might need to change their behavior. But sometimes that changing requires some policy making, requires good tariffs, requires some incentive-based things. That are the things that needs to happen in this space. And of course, coordinated and smart charging and discharging regime are some of the things that we need to do in our systems to support high penetration of EVs, and at the same time maintaining security, reliability, and affordability of our grid, and also at the same time having more and more renewables added to our grid. Thank you. I will stop here, and I'm open for any questions and comments.
So I'll invite people to put their questions using the chat function, and I'll ask Mahdi to stop sharing his screen, and I'll pass on those questions as they arrive. But I'll take my chairman's privilege to ask the first question, and that is that your focus was mainly on electricity and batteries and so forth, but of course you did mention hydrogen. So if hydrogen does develop, if you put your look at your crystal ball, what will that look like? Will there be at-home hydrogen generating facilities, or will there be a couple of big plants? How will it actually look?
I think I'm not really expert in that, but my guess is that it's going to be really sophisticated plants. So hydrogen is very, it's really not easy to get hydrogen. So you really need to have sophisticated plants to get hydrogen. But it will be like the fuel stations that we have. So there's going to be hydrogen fuel stations. And the good thing with hydrogen is that the charging refueling is pretty quick. So it is very comparable to what we have, but still the cost is there, and hydrogen is clean only if it is generated from clean energy. So we need to consume energy in order to get hydrogen from water. And that is good only if it comes from clean energy. But if we have that level of clean energy, we can put it in the battery. So my prediction is that in the next 3-4 years, we are going to have good technologies that you can charge your car super fast within 5 minutes. And even there are some technologies that I've recently seen a couple of vendors that they have that technologies, that you have a large battery within the charging station. They slow charge that battery, and then that battery is charging energy is DC. Your car battery is also DC, and then you can super fast discharge that battery into a car's battery within minutes. And these technologies are there. We are going to see more and more of these technologies, but there are some sectors like very long range vehicles, like trains, like ships, or possibly even airplanes, and hydrogen would be better for that kind of scenarios.
Mm-hmm. Somebody says, made a comment to say that the Australian Eastern Grid is now greater than 30% renewable energy, and that's according to the opennem.org.au. So, we're heading in the right direction, even if it is a bit slower than we'd like it to be. And there's a question, the government's subsidising with taxpayer money to incentivise. Isn't it false economy?
We have to pay the price. That, as I said, saving the environment is not cheap. That will come. You may hear from politicians that we can save the environment, we can have clean energy, and then pay less for energy. It's not going to happen.
Yeah.
Somebody needs to pay for that. This has not been happened in 1 or 2 days. Yeah. It's been done through generations. And my argument is that we need to pay the price. We need to be ready for that, just to save the environment. Yeah. That is the only solution. It has a price tag.
I guess you could spend a little bit less on submarines, for example, and use that money to protect the environment, or build up the grid, or build up a local energy EV manufacturing or battery manufacturing industry.
Oh, yeah, definitely. Yeah, definitely. I can't really, I don't want to comment on the national security kind of things, but I think changing or saving the environment, education, important. Health, these are the main things that the government needs to put, and that is the best investments. Otherwise, if there is no future, if you don't have a good environment, what we want to do in the next 10, 20, if we don't have a good weather, if we don't have good climate, if we have more and more of these extreme weathers, nothing is going to be good.
Yeah, yeah. All right. Well, thank you very much for an absolutely wonderful, entertaining, informative talk.